Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me for this new workshop. We just had a workshop a few minutes ago about some of our intelligence options and how to track some cost and some sales. Right now, we're going to cover batch, serial numbers, and then just about half of the session will be covering batches, and then the other half will be covering assemblies and kits. The format of the presentation is fairly simple. I'll be walking you through those features in more details in the next few minutes. Please keep your questions towards the end of the presentation. You can just simply type them in the chat, and we'll be answering these questions at the end of the presentation. All right, so without any further ado, I'm going to talk about batches. I hope you have a coffee in your hand and that you're ready to go into batches, kits, and assemblies. So let's start with batches. So batches, why would you use batches? The ability to use batches in Erplain is typically required for some industries, very often for food, the food and drinks industry. It is required for medical industry. So that these are regulations based on certain industries. And of course, you might want to use them as well for your own purpose. If you need to do some warranty tracking, if you need to be able to handle recalls, that will really help you to track the products exactly where you bought it from and who you sold it to. That's really the idea of batches, is the ability to have traceability from the supplier all the way down to the customer. So in order to use these features in Erplain, it's very simple. We're just going to go create a new product. I'll also show you how to convert an existing product with batch tracking as well. So if you click on the quick access menu on the top right, this is a shortcut, by the way, to create a new product or a new invoice, for example. It saves a few clicks. So I'm going to click on product, and this is going to show me the form to create a new product. So of course, you've got all the basic information like name, SKU, barcodes, description, and such. But on the right side, you have the ability to change the type of the product. And as you can see, one of these options is batch tracking. The other two, assemblies and kits, this is what we're going to talk about later on. So I'm going to click on batch tracking, and I'm going to create a new product. So I am going to choose a product in the food industry because I know this is one of the industries that will require batch tracking. And I'm going to use a product that I really like. So let's say I'm selling packages of cheese fondue. I'm going to add a SKU, for example. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other information that I could add here to my product. But for the purpose of just explaining batches, I'm not going to fill it up here. I'm going to save, and I've created a product where I enabled batch tracking for this product. So this is the product that I just created. And typically, after I created the product, let's say I'm going to purchase that product. At this time, you have not seen any differences with a regular product, except the little button here that says View Batch IDs, which I have not created any yet. But beside that, right now, there's no other difference with a regular product in Erplain. So let's go and create a purchase order now. So this is me buying the product from my suppliers. And we're going to choose one of my suppliers, and I'm going to add that product. I'm going to say, okay, the cost of the product, let's say it's 50, and because this is very high-end cheese, of course, and I'm going to say the quantity here, 10. So I'm going to buy 10 of these products from my supplier. And as you can see here, there is still no difference with a regular product at this time. And this is going to change just now. I have purchased this product from my supplier, but I have not received it yet. And this is when you're receiving the product that you're going to notice a difference. And I'm going to click on Receive Products. And as you can see here, when I receive the product, the little new icon that just next to the quantity, I'm going to show you here, for example, I'm going to try to save without selecting batch numbers. So I'll click on save, and I'm going to have an error message because every time you receive a product that has batch tracking enabled, this is going to be a requirement to select batch IDs. And that, by the way, is also another way to say that if you don't really need batch tracking or traceability, this is probably not something that I would recommend, because as you can see, and I'm showing you in the purchasing workflow, but it will be the same when you're selling the products as well. It's adding an extra step every time you're creating a transaction. So that is extra step. Of course, it's still very simple, and it's great if you need it. But if you don't really need it, I just would double check. Here, I'm just going to click on the icon here, and I'm going to select the batch ID. So of course, I have no batch ID created for this product. I just created the product. But just so you know, if it was a product that you've already created with existing batch IDs, one of the options here when you receive the products is to add the products to an existing batch ID. That's the first option. The other option, which is what I'm going to show you now, is to create a new batch ID, which is probably the most common scenario. So here I'm just going to start typing the name of the batch ID. So anything that I type here, it will give me the option to create it. So I'm just going to click on create. I am selecting the quantity. So for example here, let me show you that, let's say I've only received 5 for this batch ID. I'm going to select an expiry date. So I'm going to go, for example, in January. And as you can see here, because I included 10 products in that purchase order, and we're only receiving 5, so it's giving me an option to create another one here. All right, so I'm creating 2 with each quantity 5, and they could be similar or different expiry dates if I need to. And I'm going to click on save. And now I have selected the batch IDs for all the 10 products that I've received. I'm going to click on save. And as you can see here in the document, in the transaction itself, I can see the batch IDs that I've received. If I click on PDF and view PDF, I'm going to see the batch IDs as well here with the quantity for each and the expiration date for each as well. So this is me buying products. I also mentioned that I can enable batch tracking for any of my products. So I'm going to go in my list of products, and I'm going to click on any of my products here. And as you can see here, I have the ability to click on start tracking batch numbers. So that would allow me to convert this existing product into a batch tracking product. If I start to do that, I'm not going to do it here because, and that is a good reminder for you, once you start creating or converting a product with batch tracking, you cannot reverse that operation. Changing or enabling batch tracking for a product is changing the structure of the product completely, and this is not something that can be reversed. We should have a message here that will explain to you that this cannot be reversed, but I'm just telling you here it's always better to remind as well. If you want to reverse, the only other option will be to create a new product and delete that one. So here, this is a way to convert an existing product with batch tracking. Another way to add inventory or add stock to products with batch tracking is to create a stock entry. So here, if you don't need to create a purchase order, but if you need to add products with batch tracking to a product, this is how you do it. You create a stock entry. I still have my product. I'm going to do quantity of 4. And as you can see here, again, I have the icon to select batch IDs. I would not be able to save that stock entry if I didn't select the batch IDs. So I'm going to click here, and you'll see the 2 that I've created previously. So I'm going to select 1. I save, Here again, I could add a new batch ID as well. These are still two options that I would have. I'm going to click on save, and I've added those products to the existing batch ID. All right, so I've done this. Now we're going to look at the sales side. And the sales side works very similarly as I just showed you on the purchasing side, but obviously you won't be able to create a new batch ID at that time. You'll only be able to select existing batch IDs. So let's start the sales workflow with creating a sales order. So sales order, I'm going to select one of my customers, and I'm going to select my favorite food. There we go. I'm going to put a price, and I'm going to put a quantity here. As you can see here, I have the ability to select the batch IDs when I create the sales order. But when you create a sales order, that means you're selling the product. You might not know the batch ID yet. So that step is actually optional. So I am able to save the sales order without selecting the batch ID. This is completely possible. If I already know the batch ID, I can click on the icon here and select the batch ID that I want to sell. Both options are available. The most common scenario is actually to select the batch ID when you're shipping the product. And this is what I'm going to show you. I'm going to click on Create Shipping Order, and I will see that same icon. And this time I won't be able to save the shipping order if I did not select the batch IDs. I'm going to select them, and I'm going to select an existing batch ID. I click on Save. If you don't want to bother, by the way, selecting them manually, you can just click on Automatically Allocate. It will choose the batch IDs based on your expiration date. I click on Save, and I have sold and shipped these products. Here again, whether it's in the PDF of the shipping order or from the invoice, if I create the invoice from the shipping order, the PDF will include the batch ID as well. Okay. Now I'm going to show you, now that I've created the product, I have purchased that product, I have done stock adjustments with that product, and I have sold that product. I'm going to show you where you can track all these transactions for one product. Before I do that, I also want to quickly call out something that's being asked often by our customers, why some products are not in the inventory bulk update. The inventory bulk update is a great way to update your product's inventory in bulk. But because, as you can see here, it doesn't give me the ability to select batch IDs, you're not going to see the products that have batch IDs in that list. So that is a common question, as I mentioned. So if you have product with batch IDs, that page, the bulk update, cannot be used to do some manual stock adjustments. To do manual stock adjustments, you will have to do the stock entry and the stock removal in order to update your inventory manually. If I go in the products menu, I have my batch menu here, and this is the list of all the batches that I've created for that for all my products on that demo account. I can see the available, the on hand, the reserved, and the incoming inventory, just like the other information in the stock level. So that could be very useful because you have that information for each batch. And then, of course, you've got all the products. And here I'm just going to, I could, of course, filter just on that product, but I can show you them as well here. I have the two batch IDs that we just created together when we did the stock entry and the purchase order. And if I click on any of those, I'm just going to click on that one, for example. I am going to see all the transactions that happened for that batch ID. So if I did a shipping order, if I did an invoice, I would have the invoice number and the customer name. If I received the products from my suppliers, they would be included here, as you can see here. Of course, I can click on the delivery number here. I'm just going to open a new tab. So I like that feature as well. I can open a new tab with just the details of that purchase delivery. So if I want to see the supplier, if I want to see his exact details and quantities, which other products, that could be useful to do that as well. Okay, so here again, this is very important. You will find that really adds to the traceability feature, as you can imagine. This is where you will find all the transactions that have included that batch number. All right. Now, in terms of serial numbers, so we typically Erplain has the ability to track batch IDs, but you can use the batch IDs for serial number tracking if you want to, simply by allocating just one quantity for each batch ID. And that becomes technically a serial number. Granted, this is a bit of a workaround to use batch IDs for serial numbers. But that works really well. You just simply select the quantity of one for each of your batch IDs, and that becomes a serial number. Something that also can work with batch IDs is our assemblies. And the assembly, by the way, is going to be the next subject. So as you can see in the list of transactions, I also see the assembly. So anytime you will use that batch ID in an assembly, it will be listed in that page as well. Talking about assemblies, I am going to go in the transform assembly feature here. I'm going to select one of my assemblies. That assembly has a component that have batch tracking enabled. So you see here that product called tennis shirt has a batch tracking turned on, and I will have the ability to select the batch IDs just like I did previously in stock entries or the purchase orders. I can do that here as well, and this will be that selected batch ID that will be updated when I do the assembly. And again, we'll talk more about the assemblies in a minute. So that's a little bit of a deep dive into batch tracking, how to create and how to track product with batch IDs. I'm now going to transition to kits and assemblies. So I'm going to start at the same place. I'm going to go and create a new product. And on the right side here, as I showed you before, we have the type of product. And I have two different types here that I want to call out, the assembly and the kit. We're going to start with the assembly. So I'm going to click on assembly. And we're going to create a new product. So here we're going to create a product that's a table. So let's say I am creating a product that's a table. And when you start selecting assembly, you'll have the ability to select components directly here while you create the product. And to create a table, I will need, I will need table legs, typically 4. Unless it's a fancy table, but let's say we need 4 table legs, and we're going to need a tabletop, and typically 1 tabletop to create a table. So this is how I select the components for the assembly that I'm creating. Before I save, I also want to show you that beside that component section here that appeared when I clicked on assembly, it remains a completely normal product. It has my inventory information, it has my selling prices, my purchasing prices, everything as you would find on the normal product. And if I click on save, I'm going to create a new product that is an assembly with the components attached to it. I have previously created that assembly, so I'm not going to create it again, but that's how you create the product with the assembly. Now, if I want to allocate the inventory of my components to the inventory of my table, I go to the menu that I was showing you quickly earlier, which is the Transform Assembly menu here. When I go to Transform Assembly, I have the list of the assemblies that I've created. And as you can see here, this is the table that I've created previously. I select the location. This is where my inventory is going to be updated. That's the corresponding location. I click on Start, and Erplain will list the components that I need to assemble that product. As you can see, I need 4 table legs and 1 tabletop. And on that column here, this is the current on-hand inventory in that location. And let's say that I want to add 2 tables to my inventory. So I'm just going to click on 2. And if I click on create, Erplain is going to remove 8 table legs from my inventory and 2 tabletops. And of course, it will add 2 tables to my inventory. Back to the discussion we had before, I can also start tracking batch IDs for the assembly that I'm creating. I'm not going to do it here, but I would be able to do it here as well. On the other side, I can allocate back the components back to the inventory. So I could split the assembly. That means I would remove the inventory from the assembly and add the components back to my inventory. Same idea as creating the assembly, but the other way around. So we're just going to click on create. And imagine that now it's exactly like if I had created a stock removal for the corresponding components quantity and a stock entry for my table. That's actually the automation of that process, but it's exactly the same thing. This is what we call transform assembly. Now, if I sell, so if I go and create an invoice or a sales order for that product, it's going to sell and it's going to update the inventory of the assembly. It's not going to touch the components. The components inventory can be allocated to the assembly via the transform assembly option that I just showed you. But if you do sell the assembly via sales order, via an invoice, for example, you're going to update the inventory for that assembly alone. You're not going to change the inventory for the components. So that's the assembly. As you can see, the assembly typically is something that you can use when there is a conditioning process, packaging process, when there's an assembly. That's why I like to use the table example, because this is something that really happens. You put the tabletop and the table legs, you screw them together. You don't have the components inventory in your inventory anymore, but you have the table in your inventory. That typically represents a step, an assembly step, or again, a packaging step. And this is typically when you use transform or you use assemblies. The other type of product with components that we have in Erplain is the kits. And as you can see, I cover them together because you can still select components, but they actually work very differently. As you see here, I also have the ability to select the type. So this time I'm going to click on kit, and I will have the components as well section that appears. But you will notice that all the inventory information and all the pricing information has disappeared. And this is normal because the kit is actually a virtual product. Once you create a product that's a kit, this is just a bundle of products that you create together. The kit itself does not exist as a real product. The kit inventory corresponds to a real-time calculation of the inventory from the components, and the price of the kit is the sum of the price of each of its components. And of course, you can include a discount rate. So for example, if you want to sell 2 or 3 products together, but add them with a discount. So let's say, for example, I'm going to bundle a couple products here. So let's say I'm creating a bundle here. I'm going to have 2 pants and 1 jacket in one bundle. As you can see here, typically you will sell the components individually as well. So this is the benefit of the kit, is typically you sell the components individually and you can sell the kit as well. On the assembly, it is a little more rare to sell the components directly because typically that's part of your assembly process. You're using the components to create the assembly. Okay, so here I've selected a couple components. Of course, I could select the name, but I'm not going to show you. I'm not going to create it here again because I've created kits previously in that demo account. But again, the kit is a virtual product. And as soon as I sell the kit, and I'm going to show you now, as soon as I sell the kit, I am selling the inventory of the components. There is no inventory, no pricing dedicated to the kit. If I go in my stock level, I'm going to show you a little bit more what I mean by that. So in my stock level here, I'm going to filter on a product that is a kit. And here, this is the kit that I created previously that includes a couple of components. The on-hand, available, and reserved inventory actually reflects a real-time calculation of the inventory of its components. So if I have, for example, components, the same components in multiple kits, if I sell a kit that includes the same component, my other kits in real time will have their inventory updated. So that could be very powerful as well if you want to do that. Directly here in the stock level, because this is something that shows by location, you can expand the menu here to see the inventory by location. And something that's different in the kit is that if I click here on the kit, you will see the components inventory in that location. So you see that I need one for one product, one component for each for creating the kit, and it will give me on hand and available. And based on that information, I can see that I have 44 on hand of that kit, for example, in that location. So that's the kit, and that's how you see them in your inventory level, in your stock level. And again, I'm not sure if there's much to show, but if I create an invoice and if I include, so I'm going to select one of my customers, I'm going to select the same kit that I just showed you here. It will add the components automatically here. So I've selected the kit, and you can see the components directly here. And if I click on save, you won't be surprised because the components are included in that invoice. If I click on save, this is the inventory of the component that's been updated automatically. All right. And one more thing before I start looking at questions and answering questions. We have quite a few customers that are using our Shopify integration. And they are usually heavy users of kits and assemblies because it really provides great features for Shopify customers. There's not much to know about the integration between Erplain and Shopify with kits and assemblies, except that in Shopify, you don't really see that it's a kit. You don't really see that it's an assembly. Shopify just sees those products as completely normal products. So if you sell a kit in Shopify, Shopify won't know it's a kit, but when the order is created in Erplain, of course, Erplain will see that it's a kit and will make the corresponding adjustment to the component. Same idea for the assembly, but because it's a normal product, that's a little less complicated. The assembly, if it's included in the order, will simply be included in the order in Erplain, and you can do the allocation of your components from the components to the assembly, exactly like the assembly that I showed you before. It doesn't really matter that it's synced to Shopify. But again, Shopify will see the kits and the assemblies as normal products. Okay, so that's a little bit, a lot of information. I realize that on some subjects that are a little complex in Erplain, so whether it's the batches, the assemblies, and the kits, I've covered most of what I wanted to cover today, so I'm going to start looking at questions. Feel free to ask your questions in the chat window so I can see a couple here. If components are on hand, will the assembly show as on hand available, or must an assembly be transformed before the assembly shows as available? Yes, so that's a great question, and that's typically the big difference between assemblies and kits. So in your stock level or when you create sales with a product that is an assembly, you will see the inventory of that assembly. You will not see the inventory of the components. So if you do not have allocated the inventory for from the components to the assembly will not show in stock. Yes, that's an important part. That's different from the kit, where the inventory information for the kit is updated in real time based on its components. Okay, I see other questions. I think the kit function has just answered this stock available question. Yes, okay, sorry, I didn't see that, but That's exactly it. Could there be a fixed price to a kit rather than a kit discount? Unfortunately, no. I'm not going to go, and I'm not sure if I can, into the technical details of having a fixed price for the kits. There's actually a big technical challenge to make that happen, and I believe it's mostly due to some of our integrations. We've had that request a few times, but unfortunately at this time, this is not possible. This is a feature request that we've saved, and our product team might find a good solution one day, but currently at this time, the kit's price is the sum of the price of its components minus the discount. Okay, I see a question here. May I get a definition of batch? Okay, so batch, I'll quickly go over it, but we'll share the recording of that presentation, so you can go back to the batch section of that recording. But the batch is a way for you to have traceability enabled for your products, so you know each product can have multiple batch IDs, and for each batch ID, you can track exactly who you bought it from and who you sold it to. So that's the batch. Another question here is the use of assembly, in the use of assemblies and kits, are these compatible with QBO, QuickBooks? So yes, they are compatible with QuickBooks. Let's start with the easy one, assembly. Assembly, like I mentioned, it's a completely normal product in Erplain, so it is a completely normal product in QuickBooks. QuickBooks doesn't see that it's an assembly, it will see that as a normal product. The kits is actually the similar feature as QuickBooks bundles. So if you're familiar with the bundles feature in QuickBooks, that's very similar to the kit feature in Erplain, and you can map these two together. If you need help on that process, please feel free to contact us. But if you create a bundle in Erplain, you can sync it to Erplain, it will become a kit. If you've created your kit in Erplain, you'll have to map that product to QuickBooks in order for them to sync together. But bundles or kits are compatible, assemblies and kits are compatible with QuickBooks. I see another question here. Can we create a bulk assembly? For example, if our item comes in sizes, can we create one assembly for all sizes, or do we need one assembly for each size? Yes, you would need one assembly for each size, as if I don't know, so if you're referring to product with variants maybe, or even if it's not a product with variants, each product has its own inventory. So if you have one size available and another size available, these are like two different products. So because these are two different products, you will need to create two different assemblies, yes. I don't see any other questions. I still have a few more minutes, so I'll just hang around here, see if I can find some more interesting things to say. Otherwise, feel free to continue to ask your questions. And if a lot of questions come in suddenly, and if I don't have time to reply, feel free to contact us. You can just click on the Find Help menu here at the top right, and then you can open a ticket, and that will send a message to our product specialist, who will be more than happy to help you. So yes, that's if you have more questions. Okay, so let me see. I don't see any other questions. Yes, let me show you something that might be useful here. In your product list, there is the ability to add the type of products, and I don't believe this is something that's added by default on the accounts. So in order to add the type of product, so you can see if it's a product, or if it's an assembly with batches, if it's a single product with variants, or kit, that could be very useful to see that information directly in that page. And in order to add the type, you just simply click on the columns button and you select the type, and it will add the type. If you want to have that as your default view, this works like the filters, and I believe the next session, or one of the next sessions, will cover some tips and tricks on Erplain, and I think we are going to talk more about views if you're interested, but The view is a way for you to save filters in columns. So in one click, you can go back to that information, the filters that you selected, and you can also select the default view, which that means if you open the products page later on, that will include the default information that you selected. So whether it's filters, if you want to filter product with tags by default, and if you want to add the type by default, you can do that creating a default view. Okay. I don't see any more questions. So I hope this was useful. I hope I was able to explain that as clearly as I can. As I mentioned, these are a little complex products. So hopefully that was helpful. And I can see a question just coming in here. Here is a big one. We recently had received a product group, a container with 20 pallets, and was entered in with a batch number given by the supplier. Now we have found out that somewhere the correct batch number and 3 not. Okay, so 17 were the right batch number and 3 were not. As it was entered already, can this be changed? So if you've created those batch IDs, so it would probably become complex to change if you started selling these products, but if you haven't sold this, you should be able to go and, for example, in the inventory section in the delivery, so let's assume you've purchased and received these products. This is the purchase delivery we created earlier, so I'm just going to click on edit. And you should be able to make some changes here in the batches that you've received. So you should be able to correct the 17 and the 3. Hopefully that might be helpful. In case these products have been sold, I would probably recommend to probably make some stock adjustments, so stock entries and stock removal to fix that issue. Oh, this is a great question. I forgot to mention. I have, how is the assembly purchase price calculated, or is it manually entered? Okay, great question. Let's go back to the assembly. I click on assembly. Okay, and if you've attended the presentation before, Jordan went into in depth into covering the cost of the products and the purchase price. In Erplain, the cost and the purchase price are two very different information. As you can see here, I have, so here I selected the assembly, but I have the purchase price here that I can select, but the purchase price is not used to calculate the cost of the product. The purchase price is only used when you create a purchase order. This will be the default price of the product as you create that PO. It is not used to calculate the cost of your product. Erplain is using the moving average cost that is automatically calculated based on your stock entries, based on your purchase orders, in order to calculate the moving average cost. And the moving average cost for an assembly is the sum of the moving average cost of its components. So that's the only difference between an assembly and a normal product. And I apologize, I should have mentioned that before, but that's really the only difference between an assembly and a normal product, is that the assembly moving average cost is the sum of the moving average cost of its components. Hopefully this is helpful. All right, are there any more questions? I'll wait another minute, but I want to thank everyone for attending the presentation. As I mentioned before, I hope this was helpful. And if you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to contact our product specialist. We're more than happy to help. Okay. Thanks, everyone. And if you registered for the next few sessions, we'll be starting in a little less than 20 minutes. I have a question here. When is the lunch break? There we go. You have 20 minutes lunch break. So hopefully the lunch is ready and you can eat during the next presentation. Just make sure not to put any crumbs on your keyboard. That's usually not a great recipe for success. Anyway, thank you very much, and we'll talk more if you're registered in the next sessions. Thank you.